Hey, folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to a Friday Watchman Newscast live stream. A very busy week in the Middle East, in Europe, right here in America, where I'm sitting right now. And we want to dig in first to the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. Now, it took place this week over the past few days in D.C. And one of the things we were talking about earlier in the week that we want to watch for during this NATO summit, by the way, 75th anniversary of NATO, a once proud institution that obviously in the wake of World War II, it was established, and obviously NATO powers won the Cold War. But now NATO is not quite what it was, to say the least. And one of the things I said we want to watch for is Turkey. Remember, Turkey, and it may shock some people considering the behavior over the past 22 years or so that he's been in power of Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, the Turkish tyrant. Turkey, yes, is a member of NATO. And under his rule, I've referred to Turkey as NATO in name only, but nonetheless, Erdogan was there in D.C. this week, and I said, okay, what's he going to do? He's got to stir the pot, right? Because over the past several months, folks, and since October 7th, he's been the most viciously anti-Israel, anti-Semitic world leader this side of the Iranian regime. I do not say that lightly. His rhetoric mirrors that of the Iranian regime, and we'll dig into that more in a minute. We also, by the way, want to talk about UNRWA, the UN Works and Relief Agency, and some new revelations. I can't say stunning revelations because we know what UNRWA is all about, but stunning just in the absolute disregard for any kind of consequences, seemingly, where you have Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad members, a lot of them working for UNRWA. And again, UNRWA facilities hosting terror. Apology for some lighting issues. There we go here on a Friday here in the big studio, in the big house. But so we've got that going on with UNRWA. We want to talk about that. And Joe Biden, we're talking NATO, right? He was at NATO this week. But his comments about Gaza, and I preface this by saying, reminder, Israel is a sovereign nation that can make its own decisions about its own security and what it needs to do to defend its people against the likes of Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and the Iranian regime. But Joe Biden doesn't see it that way. And we'll break down what he said, what he stammered, I should say, these days. I take no joy in saying that, folks, because we are at a very dangerous moment. And NATO met this week. The West, the modern day forebears, standard bearers for Judeo-Christian Western civilization. That's supposed to be who the leaders of the West are, who NATO leaders are, and yet it's not going down like that. So we want to talk about that. Erdogan was the loudest voice in the room, actually, and he wants to smash Judeo-Christian Western civilization. We could use a man like Winston Churchill right now, but sadly, there was no Churchillian figures, needless to say, at the NATO summit. So I want to get into what Erdogan said, and key point here, how Israel responded. Folks, Israel and Turkey, it's obviously not a military physical conflict, but these are now open hostilities between Israel and a NATO member nation, Turkey. And the big takeaway here is, I believe, it has prophetic implications. Now, it's interesting. When I talk about the war of Gog and Magog, Ezekiel's war, we could call it, it's laid out in the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39. I believe Russia will lead that latter, and Ezekiel calls it a latter, TTER, latter days confederation against Israel. I believe Russia, Iran, and Turkey will be at the head of that coalition. And the coming together we see right now, those three nations, which historically over the centuries have been at each other's throats, I believe, folks, is no coincidence. But I believe Russia will head that invasion force up. Many people, not many, some, most believe Russia, most here on our channel, believe Russia will be involved. But some have said, Erick, you're wrong. Russia's not going to be involved in the war of Gog and Magog. It's going to be Turkey that leads it. I got to tell you, from time to time, again, people have said, nah, not Russia. No one has ever argued over Iran's involvement. Iran is explicitly named in Ezekiel 38. Persia, ancient Persia, is modern day Iran. And no one, I haven't heard anyone at least, maybe there's some, no one that I've seen, and I try to read our comments as best as I can, folks, here in the channel. No one has said, Turkey's not involved. Everyone seems to agree, Iran certainly, and Turkey will be involved in that invasion force as well, to the point I've had some people comment that Turkey will lead the Gog-Magog invasion, which, by the way, spoiler alert, does not get very far. This invasion force perishes on the mountains of Israel. But nonetheless, again, I believe Russia will be at the head of it, but others believe Turkey will actually be at the head of it. I say all that to say, there seems to be a consensus among our viewers, and we've got nearly 1 million here subscribers on the channel, a lot of prophecy buffs. And by the way, if you missed yesterday's live stream, folks, you'll want to check it out. We talked about the fate of Damascus and the prophecy laid out in the book of Isaiah, chapter 17, which says that the day is coming when Damascus will be no more. How does that happen? What are some scenarios? And does that mean that Damascus will be destroyed? We discussed this on yesterday's newscast. You can check it out right here on the channel. Just go to our archives right under newscast. They're all right there, so you don't miss a single one. And even better, subscribe so you don't miss anything, and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. Now, we've got the main channel here. By the grace of God and through your awesome support, nearly 1 million subscribers, which is great, not for us, but for getting the message out, folks. That's all we care about. That's why we do what we do. We want to bring a message of biblical truth for such a time as this to as many people as possible. So when you subscribe and you click the notification bell, that helps us get the message out to more and more people around the world. Look, we have a global audience here on the Watchman News channel. But secondly, quick reminder, we have a second YouTube channel. I know you're probably saying, Stakelbeck, you're crazy. You've got YouTube, you've got the nightly TV show on TBN, you've got the podcast. We have a second channel. Speaking of the nightly show, Stakelbeck Tonight. It's every night on TBN, every weeknight, Monday through Friday. We've got a Stakelbeck Tonight YouTube channel now as well, with clips from the TV show at Stakelbeck Tonight. A lot of the content you know and love from here on the main Watchman channel at Stakelbeck Tonight's the second channel. Check that out as well. And the TV show, we'd love you to tune in every weeknight on TBN, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, a re-air at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And we've talked a bit on the show about Turkey and Erdogan, but the consensus, as I was saying a minute ago, seems to be that Turkey's a prophetic player. And all signs point to the Gog-Magog invasion. I've gotten some pushback on Russia, but I haven't seen much pushback, if any, on Turkey's involvement. So my dear watchmen and women, and let me know in the comments. We've got a very active chat right now. If you disagree, let me know. But I haven't seen, to my recollection, much pushback. It seems like the consensus among our viewers is, yeah, Turkey's in there. Turkey will be involved. So that makes events like today and comments like today and Israel's response that much more important. Because remember, the goal of the invasion, the Gog-Magog war, the Ezekiel war, that latter days invasion force, is to basically rape, pillage, and smash Israel to smithereens. That's their goal. They don't get very far. Again, spoiler alert, but nonetheless, in their arrogance, in their hubris, in their ignorance, and in their hatred of God Almighty, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they're going to try. So Erdogan today at NATO. And again, 75th anniversary of NATO. And a time, look, NATO passed the test during the Cold War, right? Is NATO passing the test today? And what is that test? The test of defending the free world. Because, folks, we've covered this a bunch on the newscast over the months. And in recent weeks, it's intensified as I've seen Joe Biden. We knew this for 4 years, that he wasn't cognitively, physically, he wasn't up to the job. It's been exposed for all the world to see. They're a little late to the game, many, but nonetheless, in the past 2 weeks, clearly This is a dangerous time when the so-called leader of the free world is just not up to the task, and then some. And now there's disarray. Whereas, is he going to run? Is he going to be the nominee in November? Is Kamala going to be the nominee? There's upheaval. There's discord. There's disunity. That's in the United States. In Britain, you just had a left-wing party elected resoundingly, the Labour Party. In France, and we talked about this earlier this week here in the newscast, look, a coalition, a motley mix of communists, socialists, and green environmentalists won the most seats in the French parliamentary elections. It's a time of upheaval in the West. And the United States, Britain, and France, along with Germany, are the most important nations in the Western world and in that NATO alliance. Important, I mean, don't get offended if you don't live in Britain, France, the UK, or Germany. Important in terms of economically, militarily. Look, let's face it, Germany has the largest economy in Europe. Britain, France, and the US are nuclear powers. They sit on the UN Security Council. These are influential nations. And right now, they're in disarray. I say all that to say the Gathering Storm Coalition, I mentioned Winston Churchill. We could use a man like him who coined that term, the Gathering Storm. The Gathering Storm Coalition, led by Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Junior partners, Cuba, Venezuela, Belarus, and the Assad regime in Syria, as well as the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian Ring of Fire. They're watching all of this very closely, and they're licking their chops. They're salivating at the possibility of a weakened West, and they sense opportunity. Into the breach today steps Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. Now, ideally, he's got 1 foot in Asia, and 1 foot in the Middle East, and 1 foot in Europe, literally and geographically. Ideally, he'd be a bridge between East and West. But it seems that he's burning bridges everywhere he goes. NATO in name only. He's turning more and more against his so-called NATO partners and turning more into the arms of the likes of Russia, Iran, China, and the rest. And he's a steadfast supporter and vocal supporter and public supporter of Hamas. Here's what he said at NATO today. And I quote, actually, he wrote this on X, formerly known as Twitter, following the NATO summit in DC. I guess he's on the plane back home. He said, "It is impossible for the Israeli government, which tramples on the fundamental values of our NATO alliance, to continue its partnership with NATO," Erdogan wrote. Now, that was it. But you get the gist. Now, Israel is not a NATO member, but clearly Israel cooperates and works closely with NATO member nations, foremost among them, the United States. 2 things to keep in mind here. Number one, Turkey has the 2nd largest military in the entire NATO alliance, folks, behind only the United States of America. That's number one. And number two, if Erdogan's blasting that out on X, you can bet that Erdogan was applying pressure to other NATO leaders who don't exactly have stiff spines in many cases. You can bet that he was applying pressure to the likes of Justin Trudeau and Emmanuel Macron and people like this, barely cognizant Joe Biden and others, Keir Starmer, the new liberal British prime minister, and in their ears about Israel. We need to distance ourselves from Israel. They're a war criminal, et cetera, et cetera. So this is troublesome. NATO is a 32-nation, rock-solid alliance with one squeaky wheel. That is clearly, look, in the 1940s, 50s, Turkey, steadfast ally of the West. And remember, the U.S. has nuclear weapons in Turkey still at an air base there, a military base there. And that was as a bulwark, Turkey, Greece, against the Soviet Union, the Iron Curtain. Turkey was a loyal anti-communist ally in those days. And Turkey was also a friend of the West. And Turkey was fiercely secular ever since Ataturk, for that 70-year or so window. And then comes Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, the former mayor of Istanbul. In 2002, he becomes president of Turkey, and the rest is history, and not good history. He'd like to revive history in the form of the Ottoman Empire. He sees himself as a new caliph, leader of a new Islamic caliphate that he'd like to see rise. A union. What is a caliphate? Funny word, I know. A union of all Islamic nations united under one leader, one supreme leader, the caliph. Erdogan fancies himself as a modern day caliph, and he wants to see that Ottoman Empire, which Turkey was the head of. It was the last caliphate until it was disbanded in 1924. He wants to see that rise once again. And he's a member of NATO. Talk about your goals and vision and agenda being a polar opposite of those of your alliance partners. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing there, or not even sheep's clothing. The fox is guarding the hen house. A lot of different analogies we could use. Erdogan in NATO meetings talking security. Folks, how do you feel about that? A guy like Recep Tayyip Erdogan getting briefings on security from NATO leaders. And then is he running back and telling Iran, Russia, and China? Is this a man? And look, I love the people of Turkey, and I love the nation of Turkey. But the regime there, Erdogan and the Muslim Brotherhood connected government that he leads, are a big problem. And it begs the question, is he fit to be a NATO member anymore? Should Turkey, under his rule, be permitted to continue in NATO? Now, I don't have all the bylaws in front of me. I can tell you one thing. If you attack one NATO member, you attack all. That's the way it goes there. But when I brought up the bylaws, I mean, okay, how do you expel a NATO member? Now, I did research this last year a little bit, and I need to refresh my memory on it. I didn't get a chance. We were filming before I hopped on with you guys, but is there a chance? Is there a chance that Recep Tayyip Erdogan could eventually be kicked out of NATO? What do you think? How easy, how hard is it to do that? Or is this something where you believe, folks, and we have a very educated audience that watches this very, very closely, I know. Is this a case where you believe Erdogan will unilaterally make the decision to leave NATO? But if I'm him, I'm staying. And you know why? Because, again, he's like a mole on the inside for the Gathering Storm coalition that we just mentioned. And he reaps benefits from that alliance, economic, military, etc. So why leave? And he, in a way, kind of has a bully pulpit. And look, think of it when Finland and Sweden wanted to enter the alliance in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It was Erdogan that held things up. What I'm saying is this: he could be a thorn in the side of NATO, and he enjoys that because he doesn't like the West, because his ultimate goal is to see the downfall of the West and the rise of a new caliphate. He's in a great position. Why would he leave that? Again, he's like a mole on the inside of his enemy, a Trojan horse. So I don't think he would unilaterally make the decision to leave. But man, oh man, if they kicked him out, could you imagine how he would kick up a dust storm over that? He would use that. Oh. And if people are thinking, well, and there's some experts and even some smart people who have said, well, you know, we got to get Erdogan back, Turkey, not Erdogan, Turkey back in the fold. We can't kick him out of NATO because then we'll lose him forever. Well, I got news for you. You never had Erdogan, and you're never going to get him back because you never had him in the first place. And he's a ruler for life. And as long as he's in charge in Turkey, it's not going to be the kind of Turkey that you want in NATO. And look, you could say, okay, don't do anything hasty, don't do anything rash, and just kick Turkey out and make an enemy of Turkey over him. He might not be in power. He might, pass away, whatever, in 5 years. He's not getting any younger. True. But what comes after him? Is he grooming? You have to think he's grooming a radical Islamist successor like himself. So a lot of questions there. But here's Israel's response and I love this. Israel's foreign minister, Israel Katz, is a pretty bold guy. Israel Katz, I'm sorry. And he said, in response to Erdogan's comments that NATO should no longer cooperate with Israel at all, he said, and I quote, on X, he responded, "First of all, Erdogan, you decide nothing. Furthermore, a country like Turkey, which supports the murderers and rapists of Hamas and the Iranian axis of evil, should not be a member of NATO." So there you go. That is Israel's foreign minister, one of its top government officials, calling it out and saying what we're saying right now, folks. Turkey under Erdogan should not be a member of NATO. You're not where, I mean, and he said it. You are a partner to the Iranian axis of evil and an open cheerleader for Hamas demons, a demonic death cult, to the point where you've hosted Hamas leaders on your soil and allowed them to live there, and who, over the years, have actually plotted attacks from Turkish soil. We can go on about Erdogan, his comments. Where do I begin? His threats against Greece, his threats against the West, even France last year, he was levying threats. His wild, insane accusations against Israel. His labeling of Israel as a Nazi, genocidal, terrorist state. Netanyahu is a Nazi. It goes on. So to me, as long as he's in power, the relationship between Israel and Turkey is beyond repair. And honestly, the relationship between Turkey and NATO is beyond repair. Folks, I mean, we're just kicking the can down the road here. He was on a charm offensive, by the way, Erdogan, in the run-up to October 7th, where he was trying to make nice with Israel and the West once again. Why? Because the Turkish economy was in the toilet and Turkish inflation was at record levels. He was desperate. But the ideologue in Erdogan, he just couldn't restrain himself when October 7th happened. He had to let it out. Why? Because again, and he says this in his comments constantly, folks, he wants to unite the Islamic world. Time after time, he's called on the Islamic world to unite. So has the Iranian regime, by the way. And you've got some poles of influence, I guess we could say, in the Islamic world. On one hand, you have the Iranian axis where, look, Turkey will work with that axis, but Turkey works independently as well. The Iranian axis, Iran would love to be the big dog. Erdogan and Turkey, of course. The Saudis would also, the Saudis, who are not aligned with these jihadi forces, also see themselves as the standard bearers for the Islamic world. So those are the three poles of influence: the Erdogan pole, the Saudi pole, and the Iranian pole. And you have to argue right now that the Turkish and Iranian poles are ascendant. When I say pole, P-O-L-E, a pole of influence, but wait and see. Wait, watch, and see. Keep a close eye on this, folks, because I believe the rhetoric, and look, Erdogan has already threatened Israel over when, not if, it attacks Hezbollah in Lebanon. So Erdogan's chomping at the bit, and he sees this as his opportunity. Again, Sunni, Shia, there's disagreements. Egypt, Jordan, there's nations that have peace treaties with Israel. There's nations that don't. Abraham Accords. So there's certainly some clashes in the Islamic world over certain issues for sure. But Erdogan, if he wants to assume leadership, what's the one thing that usually unites Shia, Sunni? It's blasting Israel. If you want to get on the good side of your rivals in the Islamic world and you yourself are a Muslim leader, blast Israel. They can disagree with you on a lot of things, but your shared disdain for Israel is usually enough to bring you back in their good graces, at least on that issue. And he knows that, and he's using it like a cudgel. Okay, we want to talk about UNRWA. Just a brief update there. The United Nations Works and Relief Agency. It all sounds so benign. Here's the latest there. Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has announced that UNRWA is employing 108 terrorist operatives. How nice. And it has directly asked UNRWA to terminate the staffers immediately. I think that's a reasonable request. So, and this isn't the first instance of Hamas, Islamic Jihad members working for UNRWA. And by the way, this is the UN. I'm an American taxpayer, and my taxpayer dollars go to funding the UN, some of my taxpayer dollars, which by extension, I guess, goes towards funding UNRWA, which is an arm of the UN, the United Nations Works and Relief Agency. So you're indirectly funding terror. An Israeli ambassador said the presence of the Hamas terrorist has been, quote, a recurring concern, I'd say so, for Israeli officials. However, she wrote, the full scope of this unprecedented infiltration was unknown and became clear only after October 7th, in which UNRWA employees actively participated. Folks, you can't make this stuff up. UN employees, again, taxpayer funded here in the US and other places, took part in October 7th while on UNRWA's payroll, which I presume is paid in part by taxpayers in Europe, the US, and elsewhere. In recent months, Israel has discovered that hundreds of terrorists, members of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, have been employed by UNRWA in the Gaza Strip, some of them holding high-ranking positions in UNRWA or in Hamas. Wow. And Israel clearly expects UNRWA to fire these terrorists who are on the UNRWA payroll. But folks, look, we talk about the credibility or lack thereof of the UN. We could talk UNRWA all day and much more. Here's the one statistic, if you can call it that. Oh, relief and works, not works and relief. Okay, someone just wrote, sorry, guys. It's all bad, but I had the acronym wrong, apparently. It's UNRRA, UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency. I digress. The one thing you need to remember about the UN, which really says it all, we can talk UNRWA all day, all of it. Since its inception in the 1940s, the UN has passed more resolutions against Israel than any other nation. That includes the former Soviet Union, Communist China, Communist Cuba, North Korea, Syria, Iran. More resolutions against Israel than all of those other nations combined. Case closed, drop the mic. That's all you need to know about the UN. But so this is par for the course. But when something like this is dangerous, obviously, and there's so much misinformation, disinformation about what's happening in Gaza. So this is a very relevant point that bears repeating and bringing out. So you really know what Israel's dealing with here. In the meantime, what else is Israel dealing with on the diplomatic front? Joe Biden gave some comments. He held a press conference yesterday. And folks, I don't ridicule him. When I talked about the cognitive deficiencies and decline earlier in this newscast, I'm not ridiculing him or taking delight in that. I'm deeply troubled by it. This is the most dangerous time since World War II for the United States, for the free world, for Israel. And he's ostensibly the leader of the free world, and he's not all there. So you shouldn't be laughing and pointing fingers. You should be alarmed and demanding that he leaves office. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea are rubbing their hands with glee every time they see him in front of a camera. But yesterday he was in front of the cameras again, and he said about Israel, he said a lot about Gaza, and a lot of it was completely false. People starving in Gaza, false. I love the photo, the propaganda photo released, I guess, last week. Hamas released it. Someone, I don't love it. I hate it. It's terrible, but a starving child, obviously emaciated, sitting next to his obese mother. And I don't mean as it is what it is. She was obese. She was severely overweight. Something doesn't add up here. A starving child and your mom is severely overweight. So what's the story here? Well, the story it's emerging was that that poor, unfortunate little guy has a disease. He wasn't being starved intentionally. And there's truckload after truckload after truckload of aid moving into Gaza every single day. And everyone knows it. There's footage of it. But the Palestinian propaganda machine of lies is very powerful and very extensive. And unfortunately, the Western mainstream media picks it up and runs with it without doing its due diligence. It's amazing, folks. It always astounds me that we live in times where, look, there's more information at your fingertips now than ever before in human history. And yet, people are actually less educated and less informed. Again, there's information overload, news outlets, media outlets everywhere, but somehow people are less informed. Explain that to me, because I really don't get it. Because you have a potpourri of choices on the left, right, anything you want with news sources, news outlets, social media, Twitter, everything. But people actually know less, and the ignorance astounds me, especially when it comes to Israel. I think is the main source of ignorance. And when it comes to history, just history in general, the US, wherever around the world. Take a poll of today's high school and middle school students about some basic historical facts, and I'd wager you'd be shocked at what you hear. You always kind of laugh at those man on the street interviews on the late night TV shows here in the States, where they ask someone, who was the first president of the United States? Something, what's the capital of the United States? Something insanely basic, and they don't know. And people laugh, but to me, I'm profoundly disturbed by it, in that you can't help but laugh because you'll cry, in that this is a whole generation of young people, Generation Z, many millennials. And if you don't know your nation's history, how can you save that nation? What are you fighting for? It's just another nation. What are you fighting for? If you don't know what came and who came before you, and the basis, the foundation of that nation, Judeo-Christian Western civilization, a biblical foundation, whether you like it or not. Joe Biden, his regime, don't adhere to that foundation. They seek to tear it down. And yesterday he says Israel must end the war now. Really? Who are you to say that? Israel's a sovereign nation. You do not lecture and dictate to Israel. Israel can make its own decisions. Thank you very much. I've never once heard Israel tell Biden or the United States, you need to do this. Biden, you need to pull out of Afghanistan. Israel didn't need to say that, and we know how that went. You need to pull U.S. troops out of Iraq. You need to do X, Y, or Z. Israel wouldn't do that. But Biden's dictating to Israel at the time of Israel's greatest need. I interviewed someone yesterday on the Stakelbeck Tonight show. Again, every weeknight, Monday through Friday on TBN, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, with a re-air at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Our good friend Elliot Chodoff joined us from Israel. He said it's a schizophrenic policy, because the Biden administration has given certainly military support, although they've also withheld arms shipments, as we know. But the rhetoric, the optics, it's almost as important in the Middle East as the actual physical assistance. And the rhetoric, the optics of it have been horrible. He's created daylight between Israel and the United States. And again, our enemies are taking notes. Whew. Well, I hope you've been taking some notes during this live stream, folks. It's been quite an eventful week. Great being with you. Hey, enjoy this Shabbat. Enjoy this weekend. Have a great one. And if anything pops up over the weekend, we will certainly come to you live. But until next time, thanks so much for joining us. God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.